Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the disaster. We talk a lot about Chernobyl, but how often do we really discuss how this disaster actually happened in the first place? What actually went on that caused it? The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred on April 26, 1986 in Ukraine, which at the time was a part of the Soviet Union. During a routine safety test, a series of errors and design flaws led to an explosion in reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The explosion caused a massive fire that released radioactive material into the atmosphere, which was carried by wind across Ukraine, Belarus, and other parts of Europe. The disaster was caused by a combination of factors, including a flawed reactor design, a lack of safety, and human error. During the safety test, the reactor's power output dropped to dangerously low levels, leading to an attempt to restore power that resulted in a sudden surge. This caused the reactor to overheat, leading to a steam explosion that destroyed the reactor's upper structure. The accident caused immediate deaths due to the explosion, as well as long-term health effects from exposure to radiation. The Chernobyl disaster remains the worst nuclear accident in history in terms of the number of deaths and the environmental impact. It led to significant changes in nuclear safety regulations and increased awareness of the potential risks of nuclear power. In our number 9 spot today we have the operator. This story is one that comes directly from Alexei Brius, who is a control room operator at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and this is his story of the day of the disaster, which starts as he was traveling on a bus to work on April 26, 1986, knowing nothing of the historic disaster that occurred just hours before. As he arrived, he thought, quote, "It looked like it would be a mass grave. I was sure that the whole night shift had died there." He continued on to say, quote, "At the moment of the explosion, I was in Pripyat in my flat. I was sleeping tightly. I didn't hear, I didn't see anything. In the morning, I was to go to work, and so I did. I knew nothing about the disaster. I just got on a bus and went to work. As I was coming close to the station, I saw from the bus that the block was destroyed. I always say that my hair stood on its end when I saw that. I didn't understand why me and other workers were brought there, but it turned out that there was still much work to be done. Me and my coworkers got off the bus and tried to enter the territory of the 4th block as we were supposed to. There was a guard wearing a rubber-coated army suit who had orders not to let anyone in. Finally, they agreed. The guarding sergeant gave us each a pill of potassium iodide. I took it immediately. It was a special medicine made to protect the thyroid gland from radiation. All my life, I remember him with gratitude. The upper part of the reactor and the separator barrel were open. The main circulating pump was seen from the outside. Down the reactor, I saw the reactor's emergency cooling system all ruined. Its pieces were mixed with slabs of concrete. I was stepping over lumps of black graphite. I didn't want to admit what I saw, just like many other people, that it was black graphite." Alexei goes on to explain that he and the other operators had to, quote, "save those injured by fire, debris, hot water, and steam and radiation. We were to find them, carry them out, and deliver them to the medical personnel and go look for others. We saved and brought everybody out except for one person. He is still somewhere there inside the reactor." In our number 8 spot today, a bit of a bit of a break in the really dark story, we have cows. Alright, cows can cheer anybody up. The area around Chernobyl was known for its agriculture before the disaster, so of course that means there were definitely a lot of cows that could be found. While many people who were forced to evacuate had to leave their animals behind, since farm animals are not only expensive but can also be used as a source of income, many people took their farm animals with them. Unfortunately, however, many of these animals had already been exposed to the radiation in some capacity, and while it didn't affect them right away, the newer generations saw much more of the effects. In 1989, many farmers began reporting birth defects in their animals, some being much more severe than others. As time went on, the cows became less mutated, but that doesn't mean the effects went away. As the cows continued to graze on feed that was contaminated, the effects became more internal. This has led to completely normal-looking cows near the exclusion zone to begin producing milk that is toxic and not fit for consumption. While some of the outside and more visible effects of the radiation has worn off, there are still many unseen effects that continue to be prevalent today. In our number 7 spot today we have the liquidators. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Soviet authorities sent in robots to help with the cleanup efforts in the most hazardous areas. This was an amazing idea until the robots quickly became damaged or destroyed by the high levels of radiation in the environment. The robots faced several challenges, including damage to their electronic components and problems with their movement systems. The high levels of radiation also made it difficult for the robots to function, as the radiation would interfere with the robots' sensors and their controls. Of course, with robots out of the picture, humans were the ones who continued with the cleanup efforts. Known as liquidators, these people were primarily Soviet military personnel, firefighters, and volunteers who were tasked with containing the radioactive material and preventing further contamination, and they faced extreme danger and were exposed to high levels of radiation. Many of these people were working without proper protective gear and in close proximity to the highly radioactive material. Despite these dangers, the liquidators worked tirelessly to contain the disaster and prevent further harm. Many of the liquidators suffered from acute radiation sickness, with symptoms including nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Long-term health effects including cancer and other illnesses have also been reported among the liquidators. The liquidators played a very vital role in preventing further harm from the Chernobyl disaster, and they are often referred to as heroes for their bravery and their sacrifice. Many have received recognition and awards for their efforts, but many continue to suffer from the long-term health effects of their exposure to the radiation. In our number 6 spot today, we have the abandoned amusement park. The Pripyat amusement park, located in the town of Pripyat in Ukraine, was set to open on May 1st, 1986, just days after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The park was intended to be a celebration of the town's prosperity and the Soviet Union's technological achievements, but it never opened its doors to the public due to the disaster. The park features a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, a carousel, and other rides which still stand today as an eerie reminder of the town's abandoned past. The Ferris wheel is particularly haunting, with rusted and decaying carts. The amusement park was never fully completed and its rides were never tested or operated, and today it serves as a chilling symbol of the devastating impact of the Chernobyl disaster on the town and its people. Despite the danger posed by the high levels of radiation in the area, the Pripyat amusement park has become a popular destination for tourists seeking to witness the haunting beauty of the abandoned rides and the town itself. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Pilot. This is another first-hand account from right after the disaster, and this one comes from Igor Pismensky, who was a helicopter navigator following the disaster. After the meltdown, helicopter crews were sent out to try and spread decontamination materials over the site. One of these crews was actually killed trying to do this work after they crashed at the site. Of the disaster, Igor said, quote, "They told us there had been an explosion at the plant, so they needed our help. The mission was, after the firemen, to drop down loads of stuff from helicopters to the destroyed reactor. First sand, then lead, dolomite, boron. We would load up about 15 kilometers distance from the reactor. They would put sandbags into parachutes, then we would take off and pass around in a conveyor fashion. There would be a circle of up to 40 helicopters in the air, which would fly over and right above the reactor every 2 to 3 minutes. No one opened the windows. The chopper was all shut, but it was not airtight. It was not protected against radiation. The view of the destroyed reactor down below, after the main fire had been put out, you could see separate glowing reddish fire beds in the first days. This was the view from the height of 200 meters. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, but what we did not have was adequate protective gear for the mission, but that's the responsibility of those who sent us there. Radiation is considered invisible. It cannot be seen, but you can feel it. That is, you can feel a certain metallic taste in your mouth and a sore throat. Radiation never passes without a trace, so the consequences are always there, and radiation usually hits precisely those parts of the body that are the most vulnerable. So for everyone who's gone through Chernobyl, there are consequences. I remember so well the first time we flew over Pripyat town. The whole town had been evacuated by then, but everything looked sort of surreal. Linen is hanging on laundry lines, on balconies, you see dropped bicycles, abandoned cars, no life around, all people gone, but their stuff is still there. When the catastrophe happened, there was the Soviet Union. We had 15 constituent republics playing their part in handling this mess. Today, no country in the world would be in a position to handle the problem of this magnitude if it happened again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a highly radioactive mass of corium that was formed during the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. It is named after its shape, which resembles that of an elephant's foot. The corium was formed when the reactor's core melted down, causing a mixture of melted nuclear fuel, concrete, and other materials to form into a highly radioactive mass. The elephant's foot is estimated to have had a temperature of around 2,700 degrees Celsius at the time of the accident and emitted lethal levels of radiation. The initial workers who tried to remove the elephant's foot from the reactor died within weeks due to the radiation exposure. Today, the elephant's foot remains extremely radioactive and is still inaccessible. It is estimated to be one of the most dangerous objects in the world, with exposure to it resulting in almost certain death within minutes. In our number 3 spot today, we have Kopachi. Kopachi was a village in Ukraine that was affected by the disaster. The village was situated close to the nuclear power plant, and its residents were exposed to high levels of radiation. To contain the spread of contamination, the Soviet government ordered the evacuation and burial of the village, including burying the contaminated soil under a layer of clean soil. Today, Kopachi remains abandoned and designated as a part of the exclusion zone around the Chernobyl plant. The village and surrounding area serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of nuclear disasters and the importance of nuclear safety. In our number 2 spot today, we have the plant. It might come as a surprise, but the Chernobyl nuclear plant didn't just shut down entirely after the disaster. Despite the contamination and the risks associated, they continued to use the plant for years to come. Reactor 4, which exploded during the accident, was completely destroyed, and the other reactors were shut down over time. The Soviet government continued to use parts of the plant for several years to generate electricity and heat for the surrounding area, but eventually the plant was decommissioned. It wasn't until December of 2000 that the final reactor, Reactor 3, was shut down. Reactor 2 was shut down in 1991, and 1 was shut down in 1996. It is thought that the plant should be fully out of use by 2028. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the containment. After the disaster took place, the damaged reactor, Reactor number 4, was sealed in a heavy concrete sarcophagus that was meant to keep the radiation concealed and contained. While this may seem like a foolproof plan, there are many debates about how effective this containment actually is and how effective it may or may not continue to be. These are, of course, super important questions, and considering the fact that it's something we've never really had to deal with before in any way, how are we really supposed to know until we try? The building of a new structure called the New Safe Confinement Structure started in 2006, and it was completed in 2017. The new structure is 843 feet wide, 531 feet long, and 356 feet tall, and is meant to keep the reactor and its previous sarcophagus contained for at least the next 100 years. Despite that relatively short amount of time, experts say that the exclusion zone and surrounding area will remain uninhabitable for the next 20,000 years.
Coming in first in our number 10 spot are abandoned dolls. So if you guys have ever seen one of my videos before, then you might already know I have a specific disdain for creepy dolls. And wouldn't you know it, the exclusion zone is said to be filled with broken and abandoned dolls at every turn. Apparently, the specific area is Pripyat, and those that have visited report seeing things like baby dolls sitting in abandoned hospitals, creepy dolls sitting on windowsills propped up, on skeletal bed frames sprawled out in piles of debris, and the most creepy of all, wearing a gas mask. Now, to be fair, there is a high possibility that while many of these toys are remnants from the actual disaster, there's definitely some tourism interference. But interference or not, many still believe the dolls are haunted. In fact, some visitors swear they've seen the dolls watch them as they walk along the grounds. So whether you are afraid of creepy evil dolls or not, broken dolls without limbs sitting in the middle of a nuclear ghost town is one of my worst nightmares. Coming in at number 9, a natural earthquake. Okay, so I'll start off by saying this might not fully be a creepy encounter, but it's definitely a strange little piece of the puzzle that I had never heard about until now. Apparently back in 1996, there had been a study to explore the possibility of an earthquake being a partial reason for the explosion of Reactor 4. However, experts quickly revealed that report had over 80 discrepancies, and so it was kind of thrown out as a theory. But the following year, in 1997, a separate group of scientists from the United Institute of the Physics of the Earth decided to revisit the study, and they came to an interesting conclusion. So as they reported, the night of April 25th, 1986, which was the night prior to the disaster, 3 nearby geological stations recorded a relatively weak seismic event. Now, normally this probably wouldn't be cause for concern, but according to the study, the earthquake, albeit small, is thought to have occurred a mere 16 seconds prior to the explosion, and could have potentially caused an issue with the proper insertion of the graphite rods designed to protect the reactor, as the facility lacked proper protection from seismic movement. I mean, if nothing else, it's definitely a strange little coincidence. Coming in at number 8, weaponized earthquake. Speaking of earthquakes, inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, there is apparently also some evidence that tectonic weapons were being researched and developed in the Soviet Union at the time. Now, to be clear, it's not known if these weapons were actually ever deployed, but there are some theories out there that suggest that a weaponized earthquake might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. On May 30th, 1992, Pravda, which was the former official newspaper of the Soviet Union, reported that a geophysical or tectonic weapon was actually developed in the USSR despite the UN convention. Pravda, which was the former official newspaper of the Soviet Union, reported that a geophysical or tectonic weapon was actually developed in the USSR despite the UN convention. Now, of course, many higher-ups denied this, but some are sure that they saw it with their own eyes. I mean, it is an interesting theory and definitely makes you wonder what could have been going on behind closed doors. Coming in at number 7, faked photography. So believe it or not, Chernobyl is actually a pretty big tourist destination spot. And along with any tourist destination comes many photos. Now, there are some pretty famous photos that we associate with the abandoned area. However, according to photographer Darman Richter, a lot of these photos we see aren't actually authentic, but rather a facade created to make money off those who love dark tourism. Richter, who visited Pripyat for his own photography, said the city was desolate in many ways and still very dangerous. However, a lot of the chilling photos that have become famous online have been manufactured by photographers looking to create the perfect horror shot. Quote, "I observed countless instances of tourists moving these artifacts around or repositioning furniture for a better shot." He then says, quote, "I watched a photographer arrange stuffed bears and little dolls so that they sat in line along the edge of a bare metal framed bed." I mean, it's no secret that we live in a very curated world where everyone is posting their best moments, but something about trying to curate a disaster zone is definitely a very strange thing to think about. Coming in at number 6, immortality seekers. On a little island in Greece called Gavdos, there is an unsuspecting group of 7 Russian scientists who have created a commune and set out for the impossible, immortality. Apparently, their founder, Andrei, had been exposed to high amounts of radiation after a voluntary trip to Chernobyl shortly after the blast. Andrei was, of course, advised to go to a clinic in Moscow for treatment. However, believing it was a lost cause, he apparently decided to settle in a small village and live out the rest of his life there. But this is where it gets a little strange. He lived. Now, this is sort of a conspiracy theory, I will admit. However, there are many that believe the scientists chose Gavdos in an attempt to seize control of the Earth and become immortal. The scientists created a tight-knit relationship with the church, and according to a documentary that was being created about the community, quote, "They feel they need to reconstruct the world and implement the birth of a new immortal human." Apparently, the scientists even began building a Greek temple where they aimed to revive Pythagorean philosophy and unearth forgotten Greek mysteries. All of which is said to be in the pursuit of immortality. Which, okay, I know it's all a little far-fetched, but I mean, if it turns out to be true, it would definitely be creepy. Coming in at number 5, Bible predictions. There are a ton of wild predictions out there, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you think that prophets and seers really do see into the future or not. That being said, there are some out there that believe the Chernobyl disaster was actually predicted in the Bible. According to the book of Revelations, quote, "And the third angel sounded the trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, burning as it were a torch, and it fell on the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." Now, at first you're probably wondering, what on earth could that have to do with Chernobyl? Well, apparently in Russian, Chernobyl is said to mean wormwood. Now, could this be a coincidence? Sure, but it is definitely a bit strange. On top of that, the fires from reactor 4 have been likened to a torch, and it's believed the third trumpet referred to the accident itself, while the bitter water had to do with radiation. So what do you think? Was disaster predicted in the Bible? Coming in at number 4, mutated farm animals. At first it might sound like something from a science fiction novel, but according to ThoughtCo, just after the disaster, and again in 1989 to 1990, there was a huge spike in malformed farm animals. Many believe this phenomenon coincides with a failure of the sarcophagus, which was a concrete tomb that crews built around the failed reactor in the hope that it would stop leaking radiation or producing deformed farm animals, which, as we know now, didn't quite work out as hoped. Among the mutations seen in the local cattle, pigs, goats, and horses born in the area after the disaster, some suffered from intensely messed up faces, extra limbs, dwarfism, or unnatural colors. In fact, one tiny little piglet became a well-known victim of the radiation. The poor little thing suffered from a mutation called dipgus, which is when they have duplicated lower limbs, and it is definitely not a great sight, I will say that much. I mean, I love little piglets, but this one is definitely giving off more of a creepy horror movie vibe. That being said, you don't need to take my word for it. If you like, you can actually see it for yourself, as it is apparently on display at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum. Coming in at number 3, graffiti. While you might think that most people would try to stay as far away as possible from nuclear disaster zones, there are a ton of people that sneak into the exclusion zone all the time. In particular, a group of graffiti artists who left behind some eerie art all over Pripyat, painted to appear as permanent shadows, assumingly like the actual ones left on the buildings in Hiroshima after their respective nuclear attack. Creepy black silhouettes adorn the abandoned city, creeping out everyone who sees them. In one room, a little girl with bows in her pigtails reaches for a light switch, while outside, a boy pulls a toy truck toward the corner of a building. On other walls, the figures appear to dance, and in a separate section, 3 young people are jumping, or as some speculate, floating, holding onto each other in terror. Those that have seen them in person say they are incredibly eerie and haunting, and some have even ventured to say that the spirits of the lost souls could live inside the walls, haunting the tourists who walk past. Coming in at number 2, aliens. There are definitely tons of theories surrounding alien involvement in the Chernobyl disaster, and while most theories are actually on the more positive side, with witnesses claiming they saw aliens stopping the disaster from getting worse, one witness, Mikhail Varitsky, had a slightly different experience. Quote, "I and other people from my team went to the site of the blast at night. We saw a ball of fire and it was slowly flying in the sky. I think the ball was 6 or 8 meters in diameter. Then we saw 2 rays of crimson light stretching towards the 4th unit. The object was some 300 meters from the reactor. The event lasted for about 3 minutes. The lights of the object went out and it flew away in the northwestern direction." Now, the question here is, was the alien a part of the other group that people say were here to save the planet? Or were they some kind of rival that was interfering and making matters worse? I mean, honestly, I haven't one sweet clue, but any alleged UFO site is spooky in my books. And last up today in our number 1 spot, the ghosts. Considering that Chernobyl was the location of many deaths, it's not a huge shock that many claim to have witnessed ghosts roaming around the abandoned grounds. But one story in particular really sent shivers down my spine. Andrei Karsakov, a nuclear physicist, was visiting the area back in 1997 and says one morning he arrived at 7:30 and headed over to the number 4 reactor sarcophagus to measure radiation, where the infamous explosion had occurred. Obviously, he was not allowed inside due to the radiation, but as he was taking readings of the radiation from outside, he says he began hearing someone screaming for help from the inside. Quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years. And the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. He went on to explain that the reactor door also requires a password and a handprint, yet he swore he heard someone screaming for help. Then later that evening, as they were eating, he noticed a floodlight turn on, which should have been impossible since there was no way anyone could be inside. Apparently his colleague tried to ease his suspicions by saying it could have been a power surge, but just as his colleague said that, the light snapped off, as if someone was inside listening to their conversation the whole time.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the reactor visit. This is a story that was told by a nuclear physicist from New York, Andrei Karsukov, and he told this story after he visited Chernobyl in 1997. During this visit, he went to the power station around 7:30 a.m. and he went into what was left of reactor number 4. This is where the explosion occurred. He began to take some radiation level readings, but suddenly he began to hear someone scream. He said, quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years, and the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. The reactor door requires a password and a handprint, yet someone or something was inside." Later that evening, as we were eating dinner outside the building by the river next to the plant, a floodlight turned on in the room of the installation. There was no way anyone could be inside. As we ate, we figured there was a power surge or something. Then, just as my colleague said that, the light turned off. Maybe the reactor itself is now haunted by the souls who lost their lives as a result of the meltdown. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Chernobyl ghosts. While you can visit certain parts of Chernobyl today that have been deemed safe, taking a trip may not be for everyone, or perhaps it's too far, or whatever 100 reasons there are for not visiting the site. But with the technology we have now, there's another way you can visit the site, and that is through trusty old Google Maps. Many internet people have walked through the streets of the exclusion zone, searching around, seeing what photos Google Maps holds. But with those virtual tours comes something that is absolutely terrifying people, and that is the apparent sightings of what is referred to as the ghosts of Chernobyl. People have reported seeing shadowy figures, sometimes even faces in the abandoned buildings left in the exclusion zone, and I have to admit, some of the screenshots I've seen are pretty terrifying. Do you believe these are real ghosts caught on camera, or is it just a legend like many of the other things on today's list? In our number 8 spot today, we have the Blackbird. People in the district of the Ukraine that houses Chernobyl have told stories of sightings of the Blackbird for years, and it is perhaps the most well-known legend that comes from the area. The Blackbird is a human creature with wings and piercing red eyes, and it was apparently seen by workers at the Chernobyl plant on the fateful day of the nuclear disaster. After this, it was reported that anyone who had seen the bird would later report suffering from terrible nightmares and begin receiving threatening phone calls. Many of the people where the legend originates from, unfortunately, were at the center of the disaster and have since passed away from the radiation poisoning, so no one is sure if the Blackbird really is out there or not. The Blackbird is said to be a symbol of something terrible being afoot, so seeing it is definitely not a great thing to happen to a person. I think it's probably just another one to add to the list of reasons why maybe a Chernobyl visit isn't the best idea. I don't know, okay? It's for your health. In our number 7 spot today, we have the government cover-up. Of course, a disaster like this is going to get some government conspiracies swirling around it, and this little ditty suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was actually conducted by the Soviet government due to the failure of a new, at the time, huge missile defense radio structure called Duga-3. This structure, that actually exists in real life, is suspected of having been wildly over budget, and it was the source of many complaints after it was built. The systems were extremely powerful and broadcast in shortwave radio bands. They would appear without warning and sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, and it would disrupt things like legitimate broadcasts, amateur radio, commercial aviation communications, and utility transmissions, which all led to there being international complaints, and at the time, people didn't know what it was. This strange noise actually would go on to gain the tower the nickname Woodpecker for a an idea of what the sound sounded like. Because of the fact that people didn't know where this sound was coming from, it led them to think that this signal was actually being used for things such as Soviet mind control or weather control experiments. So the story suggests that in order to eliminate it, the nearby Chernobyl facility was allowed to go into meltdown. It seems like they probably could have done something much less lethal and much less damaging, so I'm not exactly sure how true this one could possibly be, but there are definitely people out there who believe it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the spiders. The spiders that are residing within the exclusion zone are, of course, radioactive, but it's not only the spiders that are now dangerous to touch, it's also their webs. Spiders in Chernobyl are literally making radioactive webs, which is the stuff straight out of a comic book. These radioactive webs are also being woven in much different ways than they once were, which would suggest, of course, some sort of genetic mutation is at play. Spiders were already a creature I'd like to stay far, far away from. I feel just like tingly talking about them, but radioactive spiders adds a whole new level. Not only are the spiders now dangerous for non-radioactive animals to touch, but walking through their web is equally as dangerous to those who aren't thriving in the radiation. So not only do you have to watch out for regular old radioactive material, but now also get the never-ending construction of radioactive webs. That's amazing. It's so great. In our number 5 spot today, we have the alien invasion. Okay, it seems absolutely insane, but there is an alien conspiracy that actually revolves around Chernobyl, and there are people who believe it's true. There is part of this theory that I like, and that is because it basically suggests that aliens saved humanity. Yeah, in this story, they didn't cause disaster or try to steal our planet, and instead, they saved us from a complete and total meltdown. What happened, and how this all started, is that around the same time of the Chernobyl disaster, people reported spotting a number of UFOs. One witness even said that they saw a UFO for 6 hours. So basically, because of this uptick in sightings, people believe that the aliens came to help sort of diffuse some of the radiation levels that were seen after the disaster. This would have helped to prevent an even larger blast with an even higher amount of death and illness. This is sort of a conspiracy brought up to explain how, while this meltdown was of course catastrophic, it didn't leave like apocalyptic level damage, which believers of this theory said there should have been. So what do we think? Did aliens come to save the planet? In our number 4 spot today, we have The Musician. This is a story that comes from a Redditor named Jake, but this actually isn't Jake's story. This is the story of a man named Yuri who Jake met at a bar in Finland. Yuri is actually a Chernobyl survivor, and he had quite the harrowing tale to share with Jake. Yuri is a musician, and at the time of the disaster, he was in a state-sponsored musical dance troupe. Basically, as soon as the disaster happened, this group was called upon by the government to come in and calm the people living in the area. Yuri said, quote, "Mere hours after the meltdown commenced, our bus entered the exclusion zone at checkpoint Dityatki. We were told not anything, and the soldiers made it forbidden for speaking with the village people. Imagine not knowing a disaster taking place, yet seeing the strange workings of the radioactivity all around. Everyone was sick and dying, yet quarantined and not allowed to leave the zone." This is all chilling, but this is where the story takes a terrifying turn. He begins to describe their final performance, which was in Pripyat. The ballerina danced, knowing something horrible had happened, and she danced like never before, and she even let her hair down from her bun to just let it flow. Suddenly though, Yuri noticed that these locks of hair weren't just falling out of her bun, they were falling down to the ground. Basically, Yuri ends off his story by explaining his escape, which was through back roads and avoiding military checkpoints, and he ends off by saying that he is the only one of his group to survive. In our number 3 spot today, we have barn swallows. Any animal who lives in the exclusion zone has to have been affected by the disaster, and that includes those who spend most of their time in the sky. I'm obviously talking about birds. The barn swallows in Chernobyl are one animal who have seen a change in their physical appearance that has lasted all of the years since the nuclear meltdown. It is unclear why these birds have been affected greater than their land animal counterparts, or if these changes will ever reverse to their previous state, but here's what they are currently dealing with. The swallows appeared to have severely deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, some had partial albinism, and they were seen to have had much smaller brains. Of course, some of these issues are much worse than others, and I'm sure these changes have significantly affected their ways of life, but of course, they continue to adapt as time time goes on. It is sad that this human-made disaster has affected them in such a negative way, but the fact that they are still around really shows their adaptability and their resilience. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Chernobyl zombies. This little legend that comes from within the exclusion zone claims that after the Chernobyl disaster, we of course know that unfortunately people lost their lives, but what happened if those who did then became the undead? We're obviously talking about zombies here. There are plenty of legends that suggest the exclusion zone isn't dangerous and off limits because of the toxic radiation, but actually because there are brain-eating zombies wandering the area. I mean, I personally have never received a lethal dose of radiation, so I cannot confirm nor deny that this would turn one into a zombie, but I'm gonna go ahead and call this one most likely fake. I mean, at least I am really hoping it is. We're dealing with enough as a society. We don't need zombies on the list. This little legend can most likely be attributed to a video game that takes place in the exclusion zone, but it certainly is not based on any real life facts, at least that we know of. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Stalkers. Speaking of that video game, which is called Stalker, it might have inspired the tales of the zombies, but it also apparently has inspired some to try and sneak into the exclusion zone themselves. This popular game set in the zone has made some people try and sneak into it themselves in real life in order to live out the game. You know, like a LARPing scenario, but the only enemy this time is radiation. Basically, there are these people who are now being referred to as stalkers, and they are said to be sort of romanticizing the exclusion zone. They like to sneak in, explore the ruins, sleep in the abandoned buildings, and sometimes even bring in a device to show them how much radiation they're being exposed to, which is pretty frightening. Despite these dangerous explorers sharing their nickname with the video game, however, the name actually comes from characters in the novel Roadside Picnic, which was turned into a classic Soviet film entitled Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. The term stalker is meant to refer to thieves who sneak into places that are harboring lethal secrets. Some even tried to tempt fate even more by doing things like eating fruit that they found growing in the zone. Because of the fact that this place is meant to be off limits, many of those sneaking in here who consider themselves stalkers wear things like paramilitary gear, they wear gas masks, balaclavas, and other things to cover their face. All in all, it's very dangerous and also very unsettling. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Nachzerher. The Nachzerher are the undead that come from German mythology. While any passed away person can become one, it is most commonly those who took their own lives or passed away from accidents. The transformation to the undead only happens after passing, as it is not a contagious thing that is passed between people. These creatures will mainly feed on dead bodies, but sometimes they'll also be found feasting on the living relatives. They can transform into pigs, and this is so that they can be easily disguised before they go to feast on blood. Apparently, if the Nachzerher rings church bells, it will kill everyone who hears it. While they rest, they will lie with their thumb in one hand, and they will always keep their left eye open. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Pontianak. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. The Pontianak comes from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and is basically the vampire ghost of a woman who died in childbirth, or it can sometimes be someone who was attacked by one of these creatures previously and has now become one themselves. They find their victims by catching their scent of clothes that have been hung out to dry. After they find their prey, they will tear open their stomachs and eat their insides while drinking their blood. Certainly does not sound like a good time at all, but there is a way to stop them. If you can drive a nail through the back of their neck and keep it there, it will turn them into the person they once were again, but if the nail is removed, the monster returns. It is believed that if you put glass beads in the mouth of a corpse, it will prevent it from screaming, and an egg in its armpit, it will prevent it from flying, and then it won't be able to turn into one of these undead creatures. In our number 8 spot today, we have Rhicolochus. Rhicolochus come from Greece, and they are thought to be the undead monster of a person who lived an ungodly life. They don't drink blood like vampires, but they will walk among the living. Their job or mission is to spread disease and cause death. They will visit people in their sleep and sit on them while they sleep, which is an unbelievably creepy thought. Apparently anyone can become one of these creatures, even werewolves. If one knocks on your door and you answer on the first knock, you too will turn into one. So maybe it's better to just always answer the door once a second knock comes around, just in case, because you never know when it's gonna be an undead person. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Jiangshi. The Jiangshi come from China, and the name translates to English as stiff corpse. People turn into the Jiangshi, of course, after they pass away, but it's usually those who had a bad life or those who took their own lives. Like I mentioned before, these are stiff corpses, so they can't walk or run or really move much at all, so they must jump or hop around instead. Their appearance differs depending on how decomposed the corpse was when they rose from the dead, and some even have mold or moss growing on their bodies. These zombie-like creatures are actually blind as well, but this does not stop them from catching their prey. Once they have you, they will attack you and suck the life out of you like a freaking Dementor from Harry Potter. In our number 6 spot today, we have this Strigoi Mort. Strigoi Mort comes from Romania, and they are the undead that have risen from graves and are not to be confused with those of the Strigoi Vu, who are living vampires or witches. People who pass away before being married or those who had painful lives are in danger of becoming these undead creatures, but also those who passed away and then had their bodies walked on by a cat, which seems very particular. While these creatures can sometimes take on the shape of animals in order to get their prey, when in human undead form, they have red hair, blue eyes, and 2 hearts. This one seems super unfair, but they can also sometimes even turn invisible in order to attack their own relatives. To defeat one of these creatures, it is the classic garlic and stake through the heart trick, and they most definitely do not like the sunlight. If you bury a corpse with a bottle of wine and then come back a few weeks later and dig it up and drink it, you'll be protected from being attacked if that person happens to become undead, and that whole situation kind of sounds like a win-win to me, except for having to drink wine that's been hanging out with a corpse. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Saucuyant. The Saucuyant comes to us from Trinidad, the Dominican Republic, and Guadalupe. These creatures are old women during the daytime, but at night, her human form is sloughed off and she will turn into a ball of fire in order to travel. This creature is different from the others on this list because you can become one of these by making a deal with the devil. These creatures will suck the blood of their victims like a vampire, but there is luckily a way to defeat them. If you can find where she left her daytime skin and pour salt into it, that will be enough to end this creature's reign of terror. In an attempt to identify these creatures, sometimes people will leave out spilled rice. This is because if she comes across spilled rice, she has to pick it up grain by grain. This seems like quite an inconvenient oversight by the devil, but that's probably for the best. In our number 4 spot today, we have Derek Dew. The Derek Dew is an Irish demon that has quite a dark origin story. These creatures all stem back to a girl who was forced into an arranged marriage, but she was in love with another man. She couldn't stand this life she was being forced to live, so she very sadly took her own life. After being buried, she ended up rising from the dead to kill her father and husband in order to get revenge on them. These creatures are women who will seduce men and then suck their blood and kill them. There is a practice that can be done to stop a corpse from turning into one of these scary creatures, and that is to pile heavy, heavy stones on their grave so as to stop them from rising out. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Draugr. Draugrs come to us from Norse mythology, and man, they are scary. These creatures have a ton of powers like superhuman strength, the ability to increase their size, shape-shifting, and seeing the future, just to name a few. While one Draugr can cause another to become infected and turn into these creatures, it can also happen naturally after a person who is mean or greedy in life passes away. These creatures exist to scare the living heck out of humans and to protect treasure, and they are very jealous of living humans since they know the life they once had is now over. How they attack humans is pretty next level. They crush them and then eat them and then drink their blood, or they terrorize them so much that they make them take their own lives. Sometimes these creatures even go as far as to bother animals and sometimes even ride livestock. These guys are also very protective over their own graves and will kill any grave robbers that even think about going near it. These guys are not easy to kill though. Either a true hero will have to wrestle it back into its grave, or you will have to injure it with iron and then cut its head off and burn the body and dump the ashes into the sea. Certainly is quite a long process, but I guess it's better to do things right than to take a chance at this thing coming back with a vengeance. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Beast of Bladdenboro. The Beast of Bladdenboro comes to us from North Carolina. In 1953, in Bladdenboro, there were a series of unexplained attacks that were leaving people extremely uneasy. One night, a farmer saw a beast that kind of resembled a cat carrying his dog away, and shortly after this, there were a bunch of dog carcasses that were found that had all been entirely drained of blood, which is just so gruesome, I cannot even imagine. It became huge news, and hunters from all over were trying to catch this vampire beast. Eventually, the town just wanted to return to normalcy, so they decided to shoot and display a bobcat in an attempt to assure everybody that they had found this mysterious beast. Well, I'm not sure about you guys, but I haven't heard a ton about these only blood-drinking bobcats, and of course there are many people who believe that this beast is still somewhere out there. Every year in the town, there's apparently an annual festival that is centered around this crazy story. In our number 1 spot today, we have zombies. How could I do a list about the undead without mentioning the classic zombie, which actually originated from Haiti, and it was believed that they were the corpses that had been made to come back from the dead by a sorcerer. There's actually a famous case that comes to us from 1937. A woman was found in a zombie-like state wandering the streets, and she was thought to be Felicia Felix Mentor, who had passed away in 1907. This sent everyone into a spiral because how could that happen? While the Mentor family took her in for a while, they eventually sent her to the hospital, and it turned out whoever this woman was missing a leg fracture that Felicia had. Another case is about Clairvius Narcisse, and this is truly unbelievable. He turned into a zombie after he was poisoned with tetrodotoxin, which apparently simulates death. He was then buried before being dug up again, and then given a hallucination 18 years while being made to work on a sugar plantation. And the only reason why we know this is because the horrible person who did all of this died, and then he was able to recover from everything he was being given after not being dosed anymore. An absolutely wild story that I cannot believe. Glad that terrible man died and that he was able to recover and tell everyone what had happened to him.
Starting off this countdown, we have the little girl. When Jackie was 8 years old, her parents took her on a tour of one of the oldest homes in St. Augustine, Florida. While in one of the upstairs bedrooms, the tour guide informed them that a young girl passed away in that room, and she likes to come out and play. They all kind of just laughed it off. But a little while later, Jackie was by the window when she felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She turned around and saw a little girl with long blonde hair wearing a white nightgown standing there behind her. Apparently, the color drained from her face and she was stuck in a trance until her mom rushed to her and snapped her out of it. No, thank you. I don't mess around with creepy little ghost girls. I would have been out of there so fast. In our 9th spot, we have the wet hands. This next individual shared the time when he and his friend witnessed something very creepy. So the guy's name that shared the story is Alex, and he lived with his friend Ed. Now, he had always felt off about the house that they lived in, but Ed wasn't spooked one bit until one day. So one day Ed was walking up the stairs carrying a glass of water when he felt something cold go through him. This caused him to drop the water. When Alex rushed to see what was wrong, a creepy looking handprint appeared on the floor by the water that had been spilled. They say it was clearly a handprint. It had 5 distinct fingers and everything. They went to go get some towels to clean up the spill, but when they returned, the ground was completely dry. Coming in at number 8, we have the ghost at the end of the bed. So this story comes from a friend of mine. Apparently every night around the same time when his sister was sleeping, she would feel her mattress move, as if someone had sat down at the corner of her mattress. One time when she woke up, she even saw a man sitting there at the end of her bed. Apparently he likes to just sit there and watch her sleep. Other times she has come into her room and she has seen an imprint of someone sitting down on her bed. But that's not the only freaky things that have happened in their place. On a number of occasions, they have seen shadows move around their house, particularly the ghosts of their old cats that have passed away. I've told them a number of times that their place is haunted, but no, don't listen to me. In our 7th spot, we have the sleepover party. So instead of gossiping and binge eating junk food like normal teens do at a sleepover, this group of friends thought it would be a good idea to summon an evil spirit. So they started preparing for a seance in their friend's unfinished basement. basement. During this, they were joking around trying to decide who they were going to summon. One of them suggested Jack the Ripper. That's when one girl became very anxious and told them that they shouldn't summon anything evil. As soon as she said that, they heard a man say, "That's right," from the other side of the basement. That's freaky. This is a perfect example as to why you should never, and I mean never, mess around with the spirit world. All you need to do is anger spirits and have them latch onto you and feast on your soul. Making our way down the list, number 6, we have the portrait. This time, we may just have physical evidence of a ghost caught on camera. Back in 1919, a group photo was taken of Sir Victor Goddard's Royal Air Force crew. It's a nice photo, until the crew took a closer look at it. In the background, right behind another man, is the ghostly face of Freddie Jackson. Freddie Jackson was a mechanic who was tragically killed by an airplane propeller. He died 2 days prior to this photo being taken, but I guess he didn't want to feel left out, so he came by one last time for a photo. It's quite creepy, and over the years, of course, people have tried to debunk it, but none have been successful. It's not like they had Photoshop back then. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the voices. Now, this is my personal ghost encounter that you have all been waiting for. So one day when I was young and dumb and spending the night at my friend's house, we decided to fool around with her Ouija board. Don't do it, ever, just don't. After a while of trying it, I got annoyed because it wasn't working, so I ended up kicking the board. Which was not a good idea. Never disrespect the board, because as soon as I did this, there was a large bang on the window behind us. Now the window overlooked her backyard. It was a big window, so if someone banged on it and then ran, we still would have seen them. On top of that, she has motion sensor lights, and those didn't even go off. But that's not the freakiest part. The freaky part is a couple of weeks later I get a call from my friend. She's hysterical and crying. She told me that she was home alone, but she could hear voices coming from that back room that we were in. Even through the phone, I could hear the voices. It sounded almost as if she had the radio or TV on. I actually thought that she was trying to prank me. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I could hear like a couple of men talking to each other. It was terrifying. So we're both convinced that because I was stupid and kicked the Ouija board, and because we never said goodbye to the board, that a bunch of angry spirits were then released and just chilling in her house. Needless to say, our friendship did not last long. In our 4th spot, we have the man with the black eyes. Children and animals are often very sensitive when it comes to the paranormal. Sometimes they can see and hear things that adults just can't, like in this next story. So Reddit user Fuzzy Bandits shared the time that she was babysitting her young cousin Alyssa. She was giving her a bath before bed when all of a sudden her eyes shot to the hallway and she started crying. At that same moment, the family's dog started barking like crazy and growling at something in the hallway. She tried to calm her down, and when she asked what was wrong, Alyssa said the man with the black eyes was scaring her. When the babysitter asked Alyssa to describe the black-eyed man, she looked up to the 2nd floor stairs. Her eyes got big and she got scared again. She turned back to the babysitter and brought her finger to her mouth and said, "Shh," while shaking her head no. Time to pack your bags and move on out. Moving on to number 3, we have the friend. Shared by Dr. Stephen Kenyon Owen on Twitter, when he was younger, he used to live with his mom at an old age home. His mom was the manager there, so he lived there with her. And since he was spending so much time there, he got used to some of the old people living there, and would often talk to them. One day, Stephen and his friend were out chatting with an old female resident there. When they were done, they said their goodbyes and headed off. But his mom overheard them talking to someone and asked who it was they were speaking to. They told her, and that's when the mom's face went extremely white. The woman they were talking to died 2 days prior. Coming in at number 2, we have the patient. So this next woman shared a story of a doctor that worked in the same hospital as her mother. So one day this doctor was walking down the hallway when he came across a woman that informed him that someone was having a heart attack nearby and needed help. He rushed the woman, and when he got there, the woman in need of help was the woman that he just finished talking to. He was so freaked out at what happened that he even checked the CCTV footage. Lo and behold, the footage revealed him standing in the hallway talking to no one Like, that's so freaky. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Axe Murder House. On June 10th, 1912, husband and wife Josiah and Sarah Moore and their family were found bludgeoned to death inside of their home. But the killer was never caught. To this day, this case remains a huge mystery, and now it's believed that their house is haunted. People that have gone on tours of the house have claimed to hear children's voices and screams. Others have seen objects move and fly on their own. But scariest of them all, in 2014, a paranormal investigator stabbed himself in the house after spending the night there. The freakiest part? The murders of the Moore family occurred at 12:45 a.m. That was the same time that the investigator got.
Starting us off at number 10 is 17 Hours. This sort of reminds me of the book called Touching the Void, where these two guys are climbing this glacier or mountain, and something goes wrong and one of them has to cut the rope and let the other one loose, otherwise they were both gonna die, and the one who gets cut off lands in this crevice and actually survives. Either way, this one was shared by Reddit user Beach Knoll, whose grandpa had just gone back from World War II and decided exploring was his new hobby. Him and his friends went into Mammoth Cave despite it being on privately owned property. Laws were a lot more lax back then, clearly. Either way, while in there with their flashlights, they had a group of people somewhere else in the cave because of all the echoing. They quickly cut the lights since the sounds didn't seem very friendly, and they waited. His grandpa and friends went deeper into the cave to lose them, and imagine this level of darkness where you can't even see your own hand in front of you. It's like a black hole with just no light coming in. They then spent 17 hours in there hiding, and the only thing getting them through it was one of their friends saying, "We didn't survive that to die in here," obviously referring to the war. And no you didn't, my friend, so you're gonna survive that. Coming in at number 9 is a secret society. This one's from Reddit user Ludovico Specs and was about the basement that was under his college language lab. Turns out the place was turned into some sort of secret society in the 1800s, and the whole building used to belong to them at one point. It had hospital lights all over it, which were always just very creepy. There's an inch of water on the floor too, but the weirdest part was the main room. It had vaulted ceilings supported by pillars that had stone skulls mounted on top of them. On top of the skulls were metal spikes, which is just sus as well. Why would the secret society need just skulls on poles? It's weird. The front room also had this also the backstage area that had a chair with a bunch of questions written on it, like were they a secret society or a cult? Now the user thought his discovery was pretty cool, so he came back the next night with some of his friends to show them. The night after that, he tried coming back again, but it had been mysteriously padlocked. No one wanted him snooping, evidently. And number 8, we have the closet. This one would have sent me running for the hills and was shared by You See The Thing Is on Reddit. The police had confiscated this house from a biker gang a few years back, and it had sat empty ever since. So the user, who works at an insurance company, had to go to the house and assess its damage. We already know insurance people always screw you over, so okay. Now while in there, he described the house as pretty normal, you know, white walls, red plywood flooring, the door locks weren't rusted yet, so it was all pretty good, pretty normal. But then they opened the linen closet to see deep scratch marks all over the inside and dents like someone was trying to escape from inside of there. The worst part was that right on the back wall was this red splatter that had been painted over but was still very visible. The user's thoughts went to the person finally escaping to then somehow getting which is beyond screwed up, but I mean the scratch marks, the dents, like it makes sense. Filling at number 7 slot is Choo. Now this one was shared by Reddit user Hi Dingy Doo, who shared that he used to walk along this old abandoned railroad line just to observe some wildlife, which sounds really peaceful actually, and I'm sure it was until this encounter. Over the years, the metal tracks rusted and were taken out, and all the equipment was also taken away. The whole thing became overgrown with shrubs and weeds, and so to an outside perspective, you never really would have been able to tell it had been a train track ever. Either way, one night the user went walking there with a friend, and out of nowhere they hear a voice saying choo choo. Shit. They turned around to see this old smiling man crouched in the bushes just staring at them from the dark shadows, like, who the hell are you, bro? Like, I'm just trying to vibe and observe some wildlife, like, who the frick are you? Oh hell no! I would have literally just kicked the old man. I'm really not as violent as you guys think I am, but like I will kick people if I have to. I'm not even worried about it. Now at number 6 are the cats. This one makes my blood boil and was shared by Redditor Jetstream Wolf 12. They shared that there's this one hotel in their hometown that's super run down and that everyone just kind of breaks into fun. So they and 2 friends decided to crawl into the basement from a side entrance. Initially all they saw was graffiti, but as they went upstairs they saw blood stains all over the floor. Was someone murdered there? Find out in a second. Now they see a bunch of dead cats that have been dragged around this room and come to the realization it's their blood. That was all they had to see before running the frick out of there. Like no. That would have been me before some serial killer in the back just like hits me like she was annoying. Coming in at number 5 is the ice plant. This one was shared by Redditor Digital is 303, who was very into urban exploration as a teenager. See, I was more into Gossip Girl and reading than I was exploring abandoned buildings, but to each their own. I never judge. Outwardly. Now either way, there was this old ice plant near the user's house that had burned down 35 to 30 years beforehand, which is very ironic. You're an ice plant and you burned it down. Bit of shocking behavior. Either way, the place was super overgrown, and as the user was exploring the mangled concrete and rebar, everything seemed just normal and old and burned. Disappointed, the user went home, but a few days later they hear that a corpse was pulled out of the plant by the police. The user had literally walked past a dead body and had no idea. Like, dude, open your eyes or your nose. How do you not smell a dead corpse? Apparently they smell like proper shit. Like, was your nose blocked that day, bro? What's going on? At number 4 is the cleanup. Abandoned mental hospitals are one place you will just absolutely never find me. Too much pain and suffering has been endured in these places, especially from the way they used to be treated. So this one comes from Reddit user Slothcopter, who said they explored this abandoned mental hospital that opened up sometime in the 1800s. They opened this freezer inside to find mold all over it and inside of it, and in the past they had used it to put dead bodies in there. So did those bodies mold? Did the mold come from something else? I don't know. Now in another hallway they found the word blood written in blood since they had it tested, and the word high written in spray paint, which clearly meant others had explored this place before this person did. Which is not surprising since urban explorers will literally do everything except like meth. Either way, the person decided to visit the place again a few days later, and when they did, the blood was mysteriously gone, but the high was still there. So who's coming in and out of this place and leaving messages in blood and then cleaning them up? Filling at number 3 slot is the Sprinter. This one comes from a now deleted Reddit user who went to explore an abandoned school in his town with a few of his friends. It was really hard to get into since the whole thing was boarded up, but they managed to climb up a pipe on the side of the school and get in through a window. They checked out the basement first that had been flooded, so it was very eerie just watching the stairs disappear underwater. They then checked out the gym, and as they were leaving it, they heard single footsteps coming from the other side of the gym door. Now that scared the shit out of them since this person or thing was blocking their roof exit, trajectory. The person sounded like they were just periodically walking around and then stopping, not even properly exploring. There was no light where they were coming from, which spooked the group even more. The group decided to hide out for a bit, and after seeing no one in the hallways, they decided to make a break for the roof exit door. As soon as they did, they heard someone sprinting after them, not even that far behind them. They ran the hell up those stairs and managed to get out without getting caught or killed by whoever was in there. Bro, why were you in there alone, you creep? Now at number 2 is quitting your job. This one was effed and came from Redditor Takausin, who said this happened around 13 years ago. As an electrician, him and his partner were sent out to this restoration project for a house that was built in the early 1900s. Now when they got there, they were told some info about the house, like how it had 2 owners since it was built, and how the last one was this old woman who passed away a decade prior, and there was no one left in her family that could take it. So it was auctioned off to this young couple who wanted to modernize the whole place, which is very understandable. So they got to work installing things and had to open the attic hatch to find out it was very cramped as hell up there, and so only the tiniest worker could go up and replace the intake cable. Now the user was the smallest, obviously, so he went up there and could smell this old people smell, so he just assumed it was like her death smell, but it kept getting stronger. When he got up there fully, the stench was awful, and when he turned his flashlight on, to the left of him, he saw 5 cat carcasses, some partially partially eaten by insects or whatever eat corpses, and the others were just bones and rotten skin. The dude had just had his lunch break, so he threw up on the spot and actually quit his job after this project was done. That's scarring. And finally, animal 1 is the asylum. This one actually scared me a bit in my seat, and it's not even like I sit at my desk in a room alone. There's people around me, I was just still scared because I'm small. Shared by Reddit user Daddy's Little Screamer, when she was 16, she and her friend decided to explore the abandoned asylum grounds near her house. Firstly, if I lived in a house near asylum grounds, I would have forced my parents to move. That's not happening from any angle. There was this one tower there that had been locked for what seemed like forever, but that day it wasn't, and at the top of the tower there was a light on, and they both heard a dog barking. Thinking a dog maybe accidentally got itself stuck in the tower, they looked up and were shocked. There's a silhouette in the window for sure, but it was a person's silhouette, not a dog's. The person was the one barking. Without even going into the tower, the girls ran away, and all they heard was this person call out "bye now" in a creepy sing-song voice. You guys know what's coming next, don't you?